Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to the new Seat Mii Electric. 2012 is when Volkswagen arrived on the scene with the Volkswagen Up, and it arrived with a bit of a bang. That year it won Global Car of the Year, and sales have been pretty impressive ever since. So it wasn't a massive surprise when brand partners Seat and Skoda came up with their own, shall we say, very similar versions. So that was the Seat Mii and the Skoda Citigo. Now ever since then sales have been growing fairly impressively, but they have started to tail off again, and the reason for that is that slightly larger cars have come on so far in the interim. They offer so much more and the pricing is always coming down. So what next for the small car? Well, there can only be one obvious solution to that. It had to go fully electric. Now, that's not only of benefit to the consumer, but it's also of clear benefit to the car manufacturers because they have some pretty stringent emissions targets that they have to hit. But it's long been a bugbear for two main reasons. Firstly, everybody knows with electric platforms, they're much more expensive. And at this end of the car spectrum, price is everything. If you want to truly get the best out of an electric platform, you have to completely redesign everything. That adds cost to retail. So, was it ever going to be able to be possible to deliver a fully electric, small Volkswagen Group car that came in at a good competitive price, but still delivers a superb experience? Well, we are going to take a closer look and find out. It's really important to consider this car at its price point, and we will talk about that a lot more later on. This car is all about delivering the best possible experience at the lowest, most affordable price. Don't forget, this is Seat's first fully electric car. And because of that, they have to make a big statement about what they intend as a brand. Now, within the Volkswagen Group at large, Seat have by far the youngest population of car owners. They have a reputation of being a little bit funky, but they also, most importantly, have a reputation for value for money. So that then is what we are arriving at here. They could have done a complete platform refresh, but that would have ended up costing a lot more. By keeping things as simple as possible, you manage hopefully to get as much car as possible for the money. So that is why what you're looking at is very familiar indeed. So only a slight disappointment here. Part of keeping things very, very similar is that we do have halogen bulbs. And yes, they are a little out of place on an electric car. But again, that all helps to keep the price point exactly where it should be. Here again in profile, you can see that to keep the costing down, changes have been very, very minimal indeed. We do have a new palette of colours to pick from, and we do have brand new rims. And of course, we also have a nice little graphic to let us know what it is we're driving. The side profile of this car, I think, is perky and fun. It works for me. It's a small car. It looks nippy. It looks fun to drive. What do you think? Whether you like the aesthetic of the rear of this car really is going to come down to two things. One, how you feel about small cars in general, and two, how you feel about this within the design pantheon. So, let's be honest, if you're not a small car guy, this is really not going to be your cup of tea, whatever had happened back here. But I have to say, if you like small cars, this continues the nice, perky, dynamic, sporty feel of the whole rest of the design. So nothing to blow you away, but certainly nothing to scare you off either. Now we come to the really important bit. It's fully electric. So what you're looking at is a very respectable 251 litres of load space. That's because the batteries are not stored back here. But don't worry, you still have a very handy compartment up here right at the front to keep your charging cables way out of the way of anything that you're trying to stow. And this extremely practical separate storage ledge, that means you have two entirely separate storage compartments if that's the way you want to use the boot. Not enough room? Well, don't worry. You can still drop down the seats in a 1/3, 2/3 configuration. And when they're both fully flat down, that gives you 923 litres of load. Really not bad at all. This would be the point at which we usually start salivating over the engine, but don't worry, there's still plenty to look at in here. Now, this, of course, is the electric motor, and it's powered by a 32.3 kilowatt battery. That's a net figure if you're a bit of a geek for that kind of data. Now, if you're going to use DC charging, that's fast charging to you and me, you should be able to get about 80% within about 1 hour, and that's 40 kilowatt charging. If you've got a standard AC charge unit, that should give you around about 80% within 4 hours. Now, if you aren't able to do that and you just want to plug it in at home and you want to know how long is this going to take to put together for you, should be fully charged, I would say, within around about 12 hours. So that might sound like a very long time, but practically speaking, for the vast majority of its life, you won't be draining the battery completely empty, and you will have more than enough time overnight to bring this back to where it should be. So in practical terms, yes, those numbers aren't as wildly impressive as some of the newest electric cars, but you know what? I think it's more than enough for this type of vehicle. You get home at the end of the day and it's time to fill it up. Well, it's a fairly standard petrol style cap enclosure, and the top part here, that's for AC charging, and if you want DC fast charge, you take the bottom off as well. If you're not familiar with them, they are simpler to use all the time, so really straightforward to plug it in, whichever bit you need, and then get on with your day. Key's a fairly standard affair. Now it's time to use it to see what the interior has to offer. Well, there are a couple of subtle changes in here. For people who are not familiar with this car, you can see that there's a new graphic layout on the dashboard, and although the seats are the same, the fabric has been completely redesigned too. So it definitely does look a little different from what came before, and there is enough here to tell you that it is a different model. But if it isn't broken, don't fix it. And if I get Jonas to pan round to the door, I think this door says a huge amount about the Mii. What I mean by that is, it's exactly what you'd expect from a car at this price point. Lots of hard plastic, but that is super easy to keep clean. But in combination with that, lots of really nice practical touches. Look, for example, at this door pocket. It looks, when it's empty, as if it wouldn't hold anything. But watch it eat my water bottle. That's 750 millilitres, and plenty of room beside to store even more back there. So that actually speaks quite well to how this car's put together. At first glance, you might think, oh, I don't know about that. It looks a little bit plastic. But the more you dig into it, the more you're actually delighted and surprised by how many nice touches there are. So, with that in mind, I would say, from this point on, our review is broadly speaking going to break into two. Half for people who know and are familiar with this platform already, and half for people who are not. Why? Well, if you're used to this platform, then I won't have to say anything to you at all about how practicality and value for money rule the design. If you're not, then you might think from looking around, well, it's a little bit sparse in there. There's a reason behind the way all of this stuff comes together. So, at first glance at the dashboard, you might, for example, be thinking, well, I don't know, Seat's first fully electric car, and they've gone with very familiar analog dials. And look at this infotainment system. Again, at first glance, you think that is a very familiar head unit I've seen on other cars of this profile. They haven't changed it for this. And really, you decided still to go with a mobile phone interface? Everything here is about making this car deliver as much as it can at price point. So although at first glance you might think, you know, I just don't know if I'm going to feel amazing about that, you will when you consider what you're getting for the money. But everything about that depends on whether it drives as well as it promises to. We'll find out about that a little bit later. I'm 5'10" or 178 centimeters, but I do have very short legs and a very long torso. So if you're wondering how this car compares for you, anyone up to about 6'1" has a torso of a regular size to this. So as you can see, plenty of room. And part of that is how nicely adjustable the seats are. If you look slightly lower down, this handle can be used to raise and lower the height, and that really makes a big difference in terms of being able to put you exactly where you want to be within this car. And I have to tell you, that's a nice feature, because obviously you're always going to get compromises made on smaller vehicles. There's not the largest amount of flexibility happening with the steering wheel. As you can see, there is no telescopic function, only a rake angle adjustment. So it's really important that you can get the seat exactly where you want it to be. When you do, there are actually some really pleasant surprises to greet you. The amount of glass in this car is great, so all-around visibility is really good, as it should be in a small car. Everything here is where I want it to be. It does look a little bit sparse, but honestly, it's almost quite nice to take a break from all that digital landscape and go back to analog that just works. Everything is clean, simple, and straightforward. What I like with what they've done about the styling is it's not too overblown. I get that Seat's a younger brand. Sometimes that makes me feel a little bit old. Here, I think they've got the balance right. I think it would be appealing to younger people, but if you're like me or maybe a little older, don't worry, there's not too much pizzazz happening. Once you sit inside the car and you're ready to drive, and you switch it on, you really do start getting an undeniable sense of, well, okay, this is where some savings definitely did have to be made. Now, I remember when this idea launched with the Volkswagen Up, and that was not a recent idea, it really had a bit of a mixed response. On one hand, I think a lot of people applauded the idea to keep technology where it should be, which is with the technology companies. After all, we're all in the habit of changing our phones on something like once a year or once every other year basis. We don't do that with our cars. And you will notice a lot of the time in car infotainment systems how horribly they date, especially when they're cheaper. So I do like the idea that if you can't do a thing well at price point, it's probably better not to do it at all. Now, obviously, there's a downside to that. It's going to be a little bit of a faff having to plug in your phone, adjust it, unplug it every single time you get in your car. But it goes away with you, so that's nice and secure. And once you get used to this way of working, it's actually a lot more intuitive than you might think. The display that we have here is nice and friendly and easy to use, so you can get into your radio or your media without needing to connect a phone. Really, unless you need to have the maps, you don't need to worry about that at all. In terms of the central display, well, I think basic is a very fair way to describe this, but honestly, it gives you all the information you need. The only thing that's a little bit clumsy is making menu adjustments on the screen. Your digital display on the dashboard here is controlled differently to your digital display here. So, for example, when we wanted to change our language, you have to do that in one place over here, and then in another place over here. And let me tell you, it is not exactly intuitive when you come to using the stalk. I don't know if Jonas can see, but if I press these buttons, I can cycle through the menu on the main dashboard display. It is really not comfortable and easy to use. I think the key here is 1, get used to it. 2, figure out what you like. 3, just leave it alone. It gives you the information you need and it just works. And honestly, for a cheaper, smaller car, that's good enough for me. As long as you're letting me keep my twistable volume button on the stereo, I'm more than happy. Now, coming slightly further down, if Jonas can show you, we have a very straightforward layout here. What's slightly unusual is the automatic gear stick. Slightly unusual because in keeping with what you would expect from an electric car, there are different drive modes to offer you the difference between the best in driving and performance and the best in efficiency. And the way that you access those is actually through the gear stick. So if I put that down into drive, you can see just beneath the drive icon here, there's a plus and a minus, and that allows us to cycle through the modes. So level 1, 2 and 3, and if Jonas shows you on the dashboard, you can see how that changes. So level 1 is the lowest form of recuperation, and level 3 is the highest. Remember that pocket at the front I was showing you that was so handy to keep so many things in? Well, you're not going to keep a great deal of anything back here, but come on, that's just an excuse for your children not to leave crisp packets cluttering up the rear of your car. Once I actually take a seat inside, well, clearly it's not going to be the most comfortable experience that I've ever had. But I have to tell you, it is perfectly usable. Now, we spent a long time adjusting these seats to make sure that we were giving an accurate and fair reflection of the car. As you can tell, this seat is adjusted for me. So what looks like ample legroom, in actual fact, isn't really a fair representation. This seat is adjusted for Jonas, who is comfortably over 6 foot tall. So you can get an idea. Now, they've done something quite nice with the rear of these seats, which is to make them extremely soft indeed. So even if you have longer legs, and they do tend to push into this seat a little bit in front, you're going to find that that's actually a surprisingly comfortable experience. The headrest, well, once you get it in position, it's actually not bad back here at all. Again, very long torso, so head height representative for somebody about 6'1". What is this car? It's a town runabout. And I have to tell you, if I had to be back here for any length of time, I think I could even do a pretty decently long trip in here. And given the size of this car, that's really not bad at all. Now we get to give it a drive, but before we do, just a couple of extra numbers to throw at you. So the Mii has a battery with 32.3 kilowatt hours, and it promises a range of 260 kilometers or 162 miles. That gives it a fuel efficiency of 14.4 to 14.9. Now, if you're wondering how reliable those numbers are, what I can tell you is since WLTP testing standards were introduced across the board for electric vehicles, you can put an awful lot more faith in those numbers. But of course, we don't like to take anybody else's word for it. We like to give it a try for ourselves. And I have to tell you, so far, we haven't managed to get anywhere close to that 14.9 number. So we've actually been sitting at the sweet spot right in the middle of the range at 14.6. And that's doing a lot of static filming as well, with the car not moving and us having the lights on. Sitting right here, it's a slightly chilly day, so we have the heated seats on. That's the most efficient way of warming up the vehicle, and we're consuming somewhere around about 0.3 to 0.4. Pleasingly, the stereo doesn't make a huge amount of difference to anything, and we do have our side lights on. So you start to get a full picture. Really, you can rely on this car producing the mileage that you need. When you look to buy a car like this, if it's stating that you should be able to get 162 miles, I would say as long as you know you're not standardly going to need to do 140 or any more than that in a day, you're going to be fine. Unless you live somewhere in the Arctic, so you're consistently going to be burning through everything as hard and as fast as you can. But take it out, give it a test drive, see how you find it. I keep finding these numbers getting better. Talking of numbers, I think it's about time we gave it a try. So I'm in drive and off I go. Now, one of the things Seat are proudest of about this car is its performance over 0 to 50 kilometers per hour. That's about 30 miles per hour. The reason for that is, as a city car, they're estimating this is going to be doing more town driving than pretty much anything else. The reason I'm excited about that is because my biggest bugbear with this style of car historically is clearly the underpowered engine. Well, that combined with gearboxes that were as cheap as you could effectively make them, you don't have to suffer those things in an electric vehicle. I'm getting a 0 to 50 speed of 3.9 seconds in this. Now, that's where all the performance is. Once you want to go a little bit faster, it has a 0 to 62 miles an hour or 100 kilometers per hour speed of 12.3 seconds. So okay, that's not the fastest kid on the block, but it compares very favorably indeed with its internal combustion engine forebears. So that obviously has come at something of a price where the weight is concerned. This car has over 300 kilos of additional weight from what came before. So you might think that all of that's going to affect the handling in a slightly adverse manner. Well, they did fit new springs to it, so I have to tell you, you don't feel that weight. And what's really very pleasing indeed is that I would expect to be paying the price for that in high rollover when I'm on something like an exit ramp to the highway. Well, I'm not sure if we're going to be getting up enough speed on one right now because we just have come into rush hour in Madrid. But I can tell you, we gave that a very thorough testing earlier today, and it is extremely pleasing how this car handles. So let's talk about the drive overall. So first things first, if you've never sat in this car or this type of car, let me give you a clear picture. The positives here are that you have a wheel on every corner because it's such a small compact car. That makes it feel extremely nimble, quick, and easy to maneuver around town. Clearly, that's a huge boost once you get around town. The concern is, will it behave itself once you have yourself out on the highway? Well, we actually have put some miles down on this today, and it's really nicely balanced. I think that extra weight actually suits the drive very well, particularly in conjunction with the tuned now suspension. So that's the drive. The other nice thing about the small car experience is your all-around visibility. Because it so tightly wraps around you, you feel so nimble and agile. You can nip in and out of traffic, but surprisingly, you're not that low down. The seat position within the car is great, nothing but glass all around you, plenty of ability to see everything that's happening. And again, because we've gotten rid of that internal combustion engine, the drive is nothing but peppy and crisp. Brakes, well, you know, nothing to write home about, but you wouldn't expect them to be. They're perfectly ample for this size of car, and nicely, they're not suffering from that additional weight. I'm pleased that the gearbox is gone. The handling on the steering is great. There's nothing here that will blow your mind, except for the fact that you're getting all of this at a price point that still looks copeable for a car of this size and profile. And I, for one, am very excited about that. Well, as I'm sure you can appreciate, around town, the car is everything you could possibly want. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of driving a larger SUV around town, but it can get really old really quickly. The nice thing about these smaller cars is they're just so much fun to drive. And on top of that, instead of enjoying the driving experience, and that's my only thing to go with, I am so happy to be in electric around town. You just don't feel any guilt. You feel nothing other than good and pleased with your driving decision. Well, that's around town, but that's not everywhere you drive. So how does it behave once you get it out onto the open road? Driving through the streets of Madrid is actually a really good place to show you these different driving modes that I have. At the moment, I'm driving in one. Now, that's the least recuperative. That means that it drives most like a standard car. If I pop it over, I can change it to level 3, and you can see the difference immediately. That's accelerator on, and none of that is brake. Well, maybe the last little bit. That's where the car is taking the maximum amount of regeneration out of the system. Now, it feels very unnatural to you if you haven't driven an electric car before or a hybrid, but you get used to it very quickly indeed. And you also get used to making your battery lasting longer, which is no bad thing at all. So, plenty of acceleration, good handling, and lots of nice features. At launch, Seat made the decision that they wanted this to be as simple of a proposition as they could possibly make it. So you only have one option on the powertrain. There's only one battery size, and that's all. So if you want to wait until maybe there are some other options available later on, you can do that. However, for now, the flavors are as follows. You can have a Mii Electric or a Mii Electric Plus. Now that's the one that's we have some pricing detail on and that will be available for launch. The key differences between the standard Mii Electric and the Plus are that you get more in the way of assistance systems and support. You get things like tinted windows in the back, you get 16-inch rims instead of 14-inch, and you get some whistles and bells included, heated seats. At the price point that the car's on offer, I'm clearly going to say that that's the one to go with. Depending on what of the features you want to go alongside with that, there are 5 different option packs to pick from. What I've really liked on this car so far, astonishingly for me, is the lane keeping assist. Now, that works to different degrees in different sorts of cars, and we're simply not used to seeing it in this size and profile of vehicle. It works really well. It's very pleasingly executed. And every time it tells you, hang on a second, this isn't the lane that you should be drifting into, it does it in a really pleasing, efficient way. I think that technology is actually very well suited to smaller, more dynamic vehicles. And of course, in an electric car, it's all much more easily managed as part of the natural system that the car has. Rush hour Madrid is not one of the kindest cities to drive around, especially if you're trying to film whilst doing it. So I hasten to add, as always, safety our #1 concern. But it is a really great place to be able to show you what that little extra bit of pickup on this car can achieve. So 3 lanes of traffic. I don't know if you've driven around Madrid, but I promise you, they are big fans of tunnels. Big fans of tunnels, interesting driving, and lots of traffic. So an ideal situation for a car that has a little bit of nippiness to it. See how that works. Effortless. Just enough power, just when I want it. And that's exactly what you want in a city car. Now, I did ask whether they fitted it with special tyres. Often that's the case with electric vehicles to give you a much better return on your energy usage. Seat said they didn't think that they were special tyres, and as far as they're aware, they're standard. So again, that could differ market to market, check. But what it does mean for us here today and filming, it's actually very quiet. I'm currently driving at 80 kilometers per hour, and I can absolutely hear every single last complaint that Jonas makes. So maybe I'm not going quite fast enough. And now we come to the most important bit of all, and that is the price. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but pricing on electric vehicles from country to country is really challenging to work out, largely because some governments offer subsidies, some don't. So you'll have to check your local market. But for comparison, we're looking at the Spanish pricing for this car. And right now, that is under 18,000 euro, which for me is remarkable. For me and me the car. Well, this is not only Seat's first ever fully electric vehicle, but they've made a huge statement with it. So has that made some compromises? Well, clearly, yes. It's not a massive redesign. There aren't lots of fancy features. There isn't a great infotainment system. But I rather like the predecessor of this car. So what's most impressive for me is just how much of all of that good quality they've managed to keep in whilst changing the platform to electric, and how much better it is as an electric car than an internal combustion engine. None of those problems about lacking of power or performance. Everything you want, nice and nippy, perky. And you know what? I have to say, I think 162-mile range is perfect for this car. The balance between weight, performance, and distance is just on that sweet spot. Seat are so enthusiastic about you buying this. They're not just selling you the car for that price, they're also, in Spain, again I stress, going to provide you with a fast charging home unit that will allow you to get that 4-hour charge time that I talked about earlier. For me, at the moment, that's a more or less unbeatable package. I couldn't recommend this enough if an electric car is right for you. And if you don't think it is, I guess I would have to ask you, why not? There's so much to be excited about here. Now, if you've got deeper pockets and you want more whistles and bells, there are many other options to look at. But this is the first time I've ever really been able to say, no holds barred, I really recommend this car, because at price point, it's really great. I think you can make the mileage work for you. It's so much more fun to drive than the combustion engine versions. And you know what? Yes, the package hasn't changed. But did it need to? For a small car, I think it's actually all kinds of fun. But tell me, what do you think? Well, that's our review from a slightly wet and windy Madrid from today. Tell us what you think. I hope you liked it. Comments and questions below. And we hope we'll see you all again soon.